Development, and today we're going to do a bit of walk into the past. We're going back to Unit 4 on information security standards. I'm very, very happy that we've got Sabrina Feng here today from the London Stock Exchange Group, who's going to walk us through part of the 27001 standard, but also provide some reflections on her role and potentially other things as well. I'm interested to hear more. Just as a bit of information, I will be redoing the groups. So the ones that are online currently, I had to rejig because there's some things that just needed to change, and those will be released alongside the coursework that gets released next week. But otherwise, I shall hand over. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to hear more.
So thanks very much. Thanks, Andrew, for the introduction. So I'm Sabrina Feng. So my day job, I'm the CRO covering technology, cyber, and resilience at the London Stock Exchange Group. I also do a few other things. So I work quite closely with the World Economic Forum. I'm the co-chair of the Global Chief Information Security Officer community at the WAF. I also is the vice chair of IST 33.1, which we will talk about what that is in the lecture as well. So it's sort of international standards drafting. So why I'm here, I guess I have spent maybe last 12, 13 years participating in the drafting of international standards in information security. I'm also the editor of the latest version of ISO 27002, which I think you have just gone through. So I can take a little bit responsibility for that one if you have complained. But so I'm really happy to be here. So I love to be here because I was here in 2002. I did exactly the same degree you guys are doing today. So I love coming back here. Also, I got married here, and I met my husband. Well, after I did the master degree, and I did start the PhD after that, but I didn't finish it, and I found a husband instead. But he did finish his PhD, so I had my priority right. But my supervisor is from Germany, and she said, "Oh, it's okay. In Germany we will call you Mrs. Doctor, so you're still okay not finishing it." Anyway, so we actually got married at the University Chapel, and I still have lots of friends here, so love coming back here to do this lecture. So I think that we've got 3 hours here. There's two parts of this lecture. The first part is I'm going to talk about the standardization process a little bit, the whole ISO 27000 family standards. The second part, I'm really talking about how do we apply 27001. So I'm not going through the standard. I'm sure you can read. It's all in the library. You can read it. So I would use lots of examples, thinking about how to use them in the real life. I think you take as much as you put into these lectures as well. So I'm welcoming any questions. Feel free to be very interactive. If you have questions, just raise your hand, and we can dive into some slightly different topics that you're interested in. Okay, so with that, let's start. I'm gonna start with a video. I used it for a few years, and it's still fun to watch it myself. So let's make.
This video was made possible by Skillshare. The first 200 people to sign up with the link in the description can learn for free for 2 months. Let's see. Guidelines for information and communication technology supply chain security, preparation and characterization of Charpy V-notch test pieces for indirect verification of pendulum impact machines, methods for the assessment of departure from roundness. This is going to be a good episode because it's about standardization, or rather, more specifically, ISO standard 3103, the internationally standard way of preparing a cup of tea. First, a bit of context. Way off in Geneva, Switzerland is this place, the International Organization for Standardization, a place that, according to this Google reviewer, is filled with, quote, snobby bureaucrats. But according to Urban Dictionary, bureaucrat is a not-so-nice word for officials running the European Union. But the people in this building are not working for or with the European Union at all, so this review is false. That's because the ISO is a supranational organization. It's above governments. 162 countries worldwide are members. Canada, Egypt, Japan, Panama, Peru, Finland. Just kidding, I'm not going to go list them all, but I will show you this super quick list because I don't have the budget to animate a map of the countries. All of the members, except for these ones, have their own organization of standards. For example, the US has the American National Standards Institute, France has the Association Française de Normalisation, and Japan has the Japanese Standards Association. This organization has created common standards for 21,802 products, objects, and processes so that things can work all across the world. For example, one of the best known ISO standards is for this, the shipping container, also known as the ISO container. The standardization and implementation of this container literally made it possible for manufacturers to make products on one side of the world and ship them to the other. That's because no matter where you go in the world, ships, cranes, trains, and trucks will all be made to work with this one size of container. If every country or shipping company made their own container sizes, just imagine the amount of logistics it would take to get a container from continent to continent. Thanks to ISO standard 668, you know that every shipping container in the world will be exactly 8 feet wide. There's even an ISO standard on how to run a standards organization. But just like anything, ISO standards are not free, and they're not even cheap. For example, for all 12 parts of ISO standard 26262 about road vehicle safety, you'll have to shell up $1,600. But back to the cup of tea. ISO standard 3103. I knew any ISO standard with a controversy section on Wikipedia would make a good video, so I spent $40 plus shipping to get this 4-page document on how to make a cup of tea, because I hate money. It starts out by making a few definitions, then tells you what you need, a pot and a bowl. If you go to the annex, you learn that the larger pot has to have a maximum capacity of 310 milliliters plus or minus 8 milliliters, and the small pot 150 milliliters plus or minus 4 milliliters. You even get a page showing the exact dimensions of the pots and bowls you should use for this standard tea preparation. The exact tea preparation process is pretty standard until you get to this part. Prepare the liquid as described in 7.2.1, but pour it into a bowl after the milk. Most British people would vehemently protest this ordering, but according to the beginning of the document, the standard has been officially approved by the government of the United Kingdom. And the USSR? Perhaps being the more sensible inhabitants of the British Isles, the Irish have, however, officially expressed disapproval of ISO standard 3103. Now, before you go and say it's absurd that the ISO sells a tea recipe for so much, you have to consider the actual use for such a thing. Imagine researchers were doing a study on how ethnic backgrounds affect taste perception, with samples in Brazil, the UK, India, and Japan. The UK, India, and Japan are all tea-loving nations that would have no problem brewing a cup of tea. But it's entirely possible that researchers in Brazil would never have brewed tea before in their life. By all using ISO standard 3103, all 4 experiment sites would brew the exact same cup of tea, which eliminates the preparation of tea as a variable in the experiment. For this exact reason, there are also ISO standards for tons of other beverages and food, like coffee, cereal, chocolate, juices, and more. So, if you want to be sure that you're a standard-conforming, bureaucracy-loving individual, just be sure to send Switzerland your $40 and buy this recipe for the internationally standard cup of tea. If you don't want to pay $40 but still don't know how to make tea, you can go to Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community that has over 16,000 classes on pretty much anything.
Right. I think so. It's a bit of fun video, but it does tell us exactly how important ISO standard is. So, in information security, if you think about the different ways, we'll talk about security management, security control implementation, the different variants of how to manage security. Having a international standard that's widely used, commonly recognized, provides that common language, and then helping organizations globally to think about the common sort of way of managing security. So I'm going to start with a little bit of sort of introduction around which group of people, where does this sit, this ISO 27000 standard. So the committee that responsible for drafting ISO 27001 is the ISO IEC JTC1 IC27 Working Group 1. So it's a very long title. So the ISO IEC JTC1 is a joint committee between the ISO and ICT. So it looks after all the international standard in the field of information technology. So under that, there's various different ICs. We call them subcommittees. So I've listed a few of them. So they are allocated a number as they being formed. And you can see it started very much like software system engineering. Then there's the cards, personal identification, program language, and then cybersecurity becoming a thing, and then biometrics, cloud computing, service management, IoT, and artificial intelligence. So I've listed a few sort of notable subcommittees, but there's many more you can find out. There's all on the ISO website. But these are the committees responsible for international standards within that specific field. So there's history for IC27 as well. It didn't start it with this title of information security, cybersecurity, and privacy protection. I remember when I joined, the standard drafting committees. It used to be called IC27 Information Security. So cybersecurity was not even a term, like it doesn't exist in dictionary. So, and gradually, that as cybersecurity becoming more mainstream as a term, and privacy becoming a real concern and issue as digitalization becoming more prominent across the world, the IC27 evolved as well to cover broader cybersecurity and privacy protection within the committee. This may be a little bit out of date, but you can go into the website, ISO website, to see. It's one of the most active subcommittees, has lots of participation, and it's very productive. I think ISO 27001 and 2 is still the top 5 sold international standard within the JTC1 committees. So it's very much the widely adopted international standard. So in IC27, you also have working groups. So different working groups have different focuses. Working group 1 is where I work in. So working group 1 is very much about the management system standard. So like 27001 to, up to, I think 10, 11 is all within the working group 1. And then 2 is cryptography and security mechanisms. I don't know whether Chris Mitchell's still teaching these days, but he teaches, yeah. So he is a member, I think, working group 2, and I want to say 5. So, and then with 5 is about identity management and privacy, and 3 is security evaluation testing, and 4 there's lots of more technical security standards is in working group 4. So each of these working group would have its focus. There's international standard meeting, and then each national body have its own subcommittee or mirror committees. So in the UK, we have this thing called IST 33. So IST 33 is the UK BSI, British Standards Institute, organized, managed subcommittee, mirror committee that facing into IC 27. So when we have an international meeting at IC 27 in the UK, the IST 33 will organize the various different experts and will come together, form our opinions, go through the proposals, then we contribute to the IC 27 meetings. I did have a few pictures just to, to bring this to life. I think I can't even remember when this was, maybe in Rome. So every year we used to have 2 international meetings, and those meetings were physical meetings. This is prior to COVID. And they will be hosted by different national bodies. And then all the representatives from different national bodies will participate in this international standard drafting committees. So all these standard and the revision of the old standards are coming from these committee meetings. So I think that's probably the beginning of the new version of 27002. So for each committee, they will have a different project. So the project includes new standard or revision of old standard. For each project, there's often one editor, and depending on the size of the project, you may have co-editors. So 27002, for example, is a really big project. When we had the revision of 27002, there's one editor and 2 co-editors. And these are all nominated by national bodies, and there'll be a voting within the subcommittee, and the editors get selected based on the voting. So I believe this is one of the beginning of the meeting when we started the 27002 revision. So again, we'll go through the meetings, we'll prepare the agendas as the editor, we will go through all the contributions. So at each meeting, there's something called call for contribution. So that call for contribution is a formal specification on what do we need, what do we want each national body to contribute for that particular project. And then each national body will respond to that call for contribution. Sometimes it's around a new proposal, sometimes it's revision of the old one. And then as the editor, we need to get all the contributions together. We do something called draft dispositions. So, we will answer every single contribution. Sometimes for 27002, you have seen it's a very long document. We would have thousands of contributions. So between me and my co-editors, we'll be going through all of them, have a draft disposition before the meeting, and then at each one of these meetings, we'll go through that and drive a consensus on all the resolutions of all the comments. So it's a very thorough consensus driving process, the ISO process. So it's sometimes people will complain, we want the latest technology in the standard. There's different viewpoint from different national bodies, but we need to remember this is about standardization. It's driving a common standard for the world. So there's that consensus driving process where you may not end up with in some nations' opinion as most advanced, but it's the standard way of doing things. So that's before COVID, and then COVID hit, and we had like 18 months of work, all virtual with Zoom meetings. But we sort of we come through that, and now ISO has evolved the meeting structure as well. So, different committees has hybrid meetings, pure virtual meetings, and physical meetings, and they continued in different form with the standard work. So, like IC27 now do a lot of the work virtually, but we still have this physical meeting to bring everybody together. So, it's an amazing community as well. I do like to share this every time because I think I want to sort of get people to think about it's a really important work, and the people who participate they're experts within the field, and they represent a country, a nation, and then they come together to drive the standardization, and you meet lots of amazing colleagues as well through the process. So I think you guys are all either already in the cybersecurity field or will be. I think you should really consider and think about if you want to be participating in that as well.
I've got a question. Were there any parts of the 27002 which were particularly difficult for the leadership, or was it all smooth and easy sailing?
It was very difficult. Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult. It's a very difficult standard. I've done 27001 as well, but it's nowhere close to the challenge of 27002. So I think the first challenge is the sheer amount of comments. So it's really large. So you've got hundreds. So I think the version we were revising has 114 controls. We have reduced that control set, so it's got 100 pages. And every meeting, that meeting I would chair, there's, I would say, 150 people from maybe 40 different nations. There's just sheer volume of opinions in the room, and how to coordinate that to drive consensus is very, very challenging. I think so that's one. Throughout the process, there's just challenge never stop. I think the first challenge we had is around the structure of the standard. Again, if you remember, the version you are currently looking at have these categories, but the previous version has this thing, much is that's 14. Actually, have this page. Yeah, so you have 14. The current edition is the third edition, so that's the one you're seeing that's active today. That's the one. So I'm the editor on. But the previous version has 114 controls, and you've got organized in these 14 clauses. So I remember the first call for contribution we had, it's around the structure. So, are we maintaining those 14 clauses? Do we have different clauses? Are they slightly different? So that in itself is a very, very challenging discussion. So you can imagine like different nations have different views. There's tweaks. Some people will say, we want to combine some of the categories. So we ended up taking a really quite a transformative approach, I could say that. So, the consensus at the end is to say, okay, this is just a way of organizing and categorizing the controls. Why don't we just remove the clauses altogether, and we introduce this concept called attribute, as you have seen today. So, this attribute becoming a way to organize the standard or categorize the standard, categorize the controls in any way you wish or you would like to do. So if you love these 14 clauses as the way to organize them, you can continue to use them. And there's various different trade associations that have now published different ways to categorize all these 93 different controls. And that becoming a completely new approach to address the structure of the standard. And then, we had very challenging discussions around the definition of attributes and how do we define them, the examples around it, and then you go into very technical discussions in every single sort of guidance. So it is a very, very challenging standard to do. We spent thousands of hours. I still remember during COVID, between me and my co-editor, we'll be going through all these comments and drafting disposition, preparing for meetings. We often have a week. So those ISO meetings, physical meetings, they were usually a week. And the whole week, we need to organize ourselves to get all the experts to go through all the comments. It's a huge amount of work, so we have to, do a lot of preparation to group them, to digest them, to do our disposition, so that we want least amount of discussion during the meeting. So the better our disposition is, the less discussion will be at the meeting, and then we're able to go through the process. And as you have seen in the video, at the end it requires voting. So it's I didn't realize how much politics is involved within the ISO standard drafting committee, but there is. So there's different directions, different national body want to drive, but at the end, a standard will have to be voted. So we, as the editor, have to drive that consensus and making sure the key national bodies are on board with the way we have disposed to their comments. What's also very interesting is how industry influence the standardization process. So very large organizations that has an interest in the standards, they will invest a lot of resource in standard drafting. So Microsoft is a very big one. You would see some of these organizations, they would have a department in their organization just to drive standardization, and they will be in different countries, and they will be contributing in different national bodies. So we'll see, colleagues within one organization in Japanese delegation, French delegation, UK delegation, and the US delegation. Of course, there is, the right controls on that, but you can see a lot of, influence from the industry. Don't get me wrong, it's a very positive thing because that makes standardization more realistic, right? You got to be close to the industry. The more input we have from the industry, the better. But that drives the complexity around, resolving the conflict, the comments, and how do we get the consensus driving from the standards as well. But it's fascinating. I remember when I started joining the standardization work, the first meeting, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what they're talking about. So, I would be at a 27001 meeting, and the committee would spend 3 hours debating the definition of top management. I still remember that meeting. I was like, my gosh, this is a completely waste of my time, debating top management, and all these international experts really talking. But gradually I really get, as I learn and participate and driving the discussions, I can really see the value of this common understanding. Without this common understanding, it's very, very challenging. Today, in my day-to-day work, my World Economic Forum work, I talk to lots of CISOs across the world, one of the key challenges from CISOs is this fragmentation of regulation, and of course regulation often sort of they get inspiration from standards and policies, and I think this fragmentation of regulation and policies and standards drives a lot of complexity for organizations to manage security, especially international global organizations. I think the better the standard is, and then the better adoption it will be, and it will be easier for organizations to be compliant with it as well. Right, so a bit about 27,000. Again, I think this might be a little bit out of date because there has been new standard being published. But there's a few categories I think it's important for us to understand. Obviously, we have 27,000. That's where the terminology is. It's a terminology being used by all the standards. And then we have this category called requirement standards. So these are the standards can be certified against. So sometimes people say, oh, can I be certified to be compliant with 27,002? 27,002 is not a requirement standard. It cannot be certified. It got referenced as a reference by 27,001. So I will talk later on about this relationship between 27,001 and 2. But 2, 3, 4, 5, all these other standards is a guideline standard. They are not a requirement standard. Requirement standard can be certified against, but guidance standard is supporting the requirement standard. We then have a whole set of sector-specific standard. You have telco, industry standard, finance, financial services. Then there's cloud standard 17, and then there's privacy standard. So these standards they developed, after those when those foundational standard was developed. Gradually, there's different sector drive standardization for specific control requirements and management system requirements for those standards, and they become a set of sector-specific standard. We then have more technical standards. I would say they're control-specific. So, for example, cryptography algorithms standards. There's application security standards. If you look at all the 27,330-something, 40-something series standards, those are very much they're technical control-specific guideline standards as well. So I'm not going to spend too much time here because we're going to really deep dive into 27,001, but 27,001 is the standards that bring, that it's the foundational standards for all the standards I was talking about. So it's an information security management system standard. Do you know what are the other management system standards? Does anyone have ideas? Maybe not in cybersecurity, but in other industries.
The risk assessment one is 31003, I think, or risk management.
Yes, that's 10001. Yeah, there's environmental management standards, there's quality standard 9001. That's the one you see all the time. There's the ISO sort of mark everywhere. So these standards are all called management system standard. They have to be compliant with a directive that's mandate what need to be in the management system standard. I'll go into a bit more detail when we talk about ISO 27001 on this. So so you have spent time on 27002, so I won't spend too much time here. It's important to understand the relationship between 27002 and 1. I did talk about the difference a little bit. So, the second edition compared to the third edition has more controls. We merged quite a lot of controls. We updated the controls so that they're reflecting the latest technology trend and the best practice as well. And we sort of organized the standard into those 4 different categories as well. Is there any questions on ISO 27002? I know you have already gone through that. No? Okay. There's a few other standards. So, NIST Cybersecurity Framework, I certainly recommend you all take a look at that. So, over the years, it has got really quite significant adoption across the industry. It's free. I like ISO standard, so it's completely free. You can just download it, and there's a lot of tooling developed at the back of the standard. It does cover, take a risk-based approach. It look at the 5 categories, the life cycles of resilience. But one thing it's, it doesn't have, and 27002 is unique, is it doesn't have the implementation guidance. So it talk about, what are the control required, and it focus on the what, but it doesn't give the guidance around how. And I think ISO 27002 is still the one and single international standards go into the implementation guidance. So, I would recommend people to understand this major, framework and standard on information security. So, ISO 27001, ISO 27002, 27005 is another one, and then the NIST cybersecurity framework. I think it's worth to mention there's. Go.
I wanted to ask if there is any field in terms of standardization that you've not been able to cover, and why?
Any field
You've not been able to cover in terms of standardization. Maybe there is a particular field that you are yet to.
There's no standard yet, and there's. Interesting. Why? I don't know actually.
It just seems like they covered everything with ISO. It's like
Yeah, but there's.
so many standards.
Yeah, so the GTC1 is only information system. Even, when you can think of something, there's people thinking about the standardization. I remember, when, because I started to participate in some of the artificial intelligence sort of standard drafting work, just to observe, because this interaction with what I do today as well. And what I found is there's more standard that we didn't know about on artificial intelligence, then there's a lot of problem we're trying to solve, and you can see already there's work around the standard work. I do think there's certainly when, if there's a need, then there's probably some work has been done around it. There is a process in ISO, they look at new items. So, within IC 27, for example, the management committee will regularly do a horizon scanning and looking at, okay, what are we missing? The gap analysis around, the field or areas that requires standardization work. So, good question. I'm not sure. So, I think another thing, it's not. I mean, these are not like by definition they may not be called standards. I think. Oh, I was going to say about cybersecurity framework. So, I mean, I remember when we were at the ISO IC27 meeting, one of the working item is new work item proposal was about, okay, should we write a cybersecurity framework standard? And we did, so that, becoming a project, and then there's a group of national body experts went away, did some research, and they came back to present their research, and they said, oh, we have around 175 different cybersecurity frameworks across the world. So they sort of listed, so there's a lot of cybersecurity frameworks developed by different nations and different sort of industry bodies. I think the challenge is here again, how there's people's willingness to adopt a particular standard and make that their own. And often there's whether it's national body or trade association or a group of people that feel like we need a tweak somewhere. We need to call it differently from something else. So there's a lot of fragmentation around this world. But I think these ones are the ones I do think there's a certain adoption, and I think it's important for us to know them. The NCIC Cyber Essentials is a very good tool because it's very foundational. It goes into, I think, 10 very sort of foundational controls, most important controls. And for smaller, medium organizations, they want to start somewhere. This is, the NCIC Cybersecurity Essentials is a really good starting point. The CIS Sense 20, has been around for decades and still have lots of value today. Again, it's probably something, for a smaller organization to consider where to start. It's a very good starting point. And I think it's, instead of looking at ISO 27002, for example, that is quite daunting, looking at 93 controls, and this go into a much smaller control set. PCI DSS, again, huge adoption. It's payment card industry data security standards. So if you're in the payment industry, you would be very familiar with it. What's interesting about this standard, it's very specific around the requirements, in particular the technical requirements. So I think if, as you can see, and I will talk about it a little bit more, is there's a lot of criticism around 27001 standard, for example, because it's very principle-based. It looks at the management system rather than giving confidence in control effectiveness. What's different from, for example, PCI DSS as a standard is really require specific requirements, has a very specific requirements on specific component of the payment industry, for example, encryption and others. So, these type of standards is really useful for, with that, to achieve the purpose it requires, to give confidence on control effectiveness. So it's very widely adopted, largely because the payment card industry have mandated this, for merchant to be compliant with, and it's got a very stringent compliance framework, audit framework, with different tiering as well. So, I think these are the things you need to know and to understand, at least to have a look at what does that really the standard say and tell us. Any questions? Any questions on this section, the more sort of background, generic section around standardization? Any? No? Oh.
So does it take 9 years then to create a new version? Or
Some has quite long. I think the 27002, the actual project is 5 years. But there is the preparation, the what we call new work item proposal, get approval, so it's a long process. I think that's one of the, I guess, criticism people have around standardization process. It takes very long, but the world may have moved on. So that's why you see a lot of the standards maybe more sort of principle based that that doesn't need constant update, and it will be there for a long time.
do you release any sort of interim, like drafts or anything?
Yeah, sometimes there's technical addendums. So, for example, when there is a error in the standard, but otherwise it's very much a update of the version. So you wouldn't have an interim version, but they will sometimes have this technical addendum when there's a problem or the error or gets changed. Because it's a huge effort, because when there's a new standard, the whole ecosystem has to adopt. So the auditors have to adopt, the people who attest have to adopt. And when we change 27002, for example, all the sector-specific standards that are based on 27002 have to change as well. So it's a huge effort for the whole ecosystem to evolve.
So when you're at these meetings with the rest of the ISO 27000 people, is everyone voting kind of like on everything at once, or is there like kind of delegations of responsibility for each different kind of, I guess, maybe control group? Like how does it work, I guess? Is it just like voting?
Good question. So a standard will go through different stages, and different stages requires different level of participation and the voting rights. So you start with like CD's committee draft. So during that stage, every one participating as an expert rather than representing the nation, like their national body. So they join the meeting as an expert, and then you get consensus and the voting by individual expert participated in the meeting. So we actually, literally, during the meeting, we will have to so before the meeting, we would give our disposition, and we would go through all the disposition where there's a few things, either we as editor to say we feel we're not sure about this, we wanted a discussion at the meeting, so we will say discuss, or we will only go through the ones people do not disagree. So we will have to 2-3 weeks before the meeting, we will circulate all of our disposition, and all the experts would have reviewed them, they come prepared at the meeting. So as an editor, we'll sit here sharing our documents on the screen, we'll go through it to say anyone disagree, and people will raise their hand, we'll have a discussion, drive consensus, or we go to the ones that we said we want to discuss as editor. So there's hence lots of sort of preparation required. Then once a standard goes to the next stage, so CD, and then I haven't done this for so long, I almost forgot. So I think CD, DIS, and FDIS. So as they becoming a draft that requires national body voting, then the experts will no longer be able to vote on behalf of themselves. So there will be an opinion from the UK, from the French, from the Americans, from everybody represented had to vote as approve, disapprove, abstain. So that requires a bit that more structure at the end of the when the document go to the next stage. But at the meeting, you will see they will have to be very much coordinated. You will see the comment coming from the national body rather than from expert. And those experts within that national body, they have to sort of coordinate on what's the national body position on that particular comment. It's quite technical. It's quite it's fun. But I would not do it again. Not for ISO 27002 certainly. The conveyor said, "Oh, well, we're thinking about a revision." I said, "Yep." It's really hard work. Any other thoughts, questions?
Carnegie Mellon Institute, they have the Carnegie Mellon.
Yes.
They have these maturity models where they say an organization can be a level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, depending on the maturity of the implementation of the model that they are posing.
Yeah.
Does ISO have plans to kind of introduce something where they can specifically look at control implementations?
Yeah.
So, because right now, we have an ISO 27001. Once a company and organization gets certified, then they are on a level footing, even though they may not be as effective when you compare on a apple to apple. They may not be as effective as somebody else who has probably done a lot better implementation. For example, Microsoft probably has done really good control implementation because it's a need for them.
Yeah.
But then they've got ISO 27001. It's probably not fair that they are compared to somebody who's just come into and they're very, very immature. They've done something, but they've got a certification, but none of the controls are effective. So is there plans to have some sort of maturity levels?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So certainly IC 27, so the ISO working group, there were various different times this proposal got discussed. And I was in one of them. I think one of the key arguments of not to do it is, it's a standardization point. It's how do you, the quality of the audit, determining the quality of, how well you're able to, because I guess the reputation of the standard at the end is reflected on the quality of the audit and how it's presented to the rest of the world. And that becoming a lot more objective and difficult to control. That's not to say, there may not have it in the future, but I think, that's where I think some of this other framework becoming more popular, getting more market share, because they sort of plugged in the gap, like, the NIST framework has a maturity scores. You can say I'm at 4.3 or whatever. So that, I think there's always a desire in the industry and within an organization or as a peer to say, okay, how am I comparing with others, like the benchmarking point. But I think standardization is very much about you meet the standard or you don't meet the standard. So, I think it's a good debate. I think we should keep on having that debate on a regular basis. But I think as an organization, when you look at this, you will say, okay, I'm going to use different tools for different purposes. And you will see lots of organizations will have ISO standard. They have NIST maturity, and they will be also compliant with PCI DSS and other things as well. So you use different tools for different purposes for that, I think. Any other questions?
Shall we take a quick 5-minute break? So we'll just start just after the hour so you can stretch your legs.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm going to go through that. This is all about applying 27001. So I really use 27001 as a framework to talk about security management. So You know, my first job after doing this degree is to do ISO 27001 implementation for a company, and I just remember reading every sentence of the standard, doing everything, learning about it. And I really, really think it is the most important cybersecurity standard ever, because you know, I know many of you may be very technical, you're going to a very technical direction, and you know, some of you are experienced, you know, security managers, CISOs, or some of you may be coming from very different backgrounds. But understand ISO 27001 gives you the big picture about what does it mean by managing information security. So, you know, I've been in this field for 20-something years. You know, to this day, I still meet cybersecurity people do not understand the concept of security management. They still think it's about configure a tool, you know, that firewall, that EDR, or whatever it is. But this gave you that big picture about security management, regardless which direction you go in your career in cybersecurity. So I'll start with a bit of definition. So, you know, somebody talked about risk. So I still use this definition. So risk is about the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So this is 27,000 definition. It's ISO 31,000 definition. So, you know, there's different way of measure risk, but I would always go back to the basics. The basics of risk is around the likelihood and the consequences. So we often express it in a grade. Here's there's a likelihood, here's the impact. Where do you put on that grade is where your risk is. So this is a foundational concept. You know, regardless what type of risk management or risk assessment approach you take, you know, at the end it's about how likely something will happen that have what type of impact. So it is about this effect of uncertainty on objectives. I will talk a little bit about this now, but like we'll really explore it later on. This uncertainty has two elements. There's a positive element and the negative element. So the negative one, we say it's about risk, but the other side of it is about opportunities. So it's important to understand these directions, and it's important for cybersecurity people to think about the other side of the uncertainty as well. So controls. So the definition of control used to be the measure that modifies risk. I can't remember which year, but the definition of control changed to the measure that is maintaining and modifying risk. It's an important change, although it's only one word. You know, if you think about the control suite, there are lots of things you do. They are not, you know, reduce the likelihood or reduce the impact, but they're important to be there just so that you can maintaining the level of risk that's there. So that is still a control. A control doesn't have to be reducing a risk. It could be just maintaining it so that it doesn't get worse. And this definition of management system is really important. So ISO 27001 is not about a technical control, what control should be used. The foundational control, that's a different standard. 27001 is about management system. The managed system is this interacting element within this organization to establish the policies, the objectives, the process to achieve the goal, which is to manage the effect of uncertainty against the objectives, which is the risk. so these are what I consider like the most important definition of ISO 27001, and it's important to understand them, and it will help us to understand the whole information security management as a bigger picture. So I will go into each of the chapter. So the first chapter, so that, you know, chapter 1, 2, or 3, they're like terminologies, etc., etc. So start with 4. It's about the context of the organization. So it's got, you know, 4 things: understanding the organization and its context, understanding the need, determining the scope, and then talk about the information security management. So there are a few things I want to talk about. So this starting point, understanding the organization and its context, is a key, and I don't think many people start here, but I think it's important to start with here. So what do you think are the important internal and external context? Any thoughts?
Business objectives of the organisation.
Yeah, yeah. What's the business doing? What's the objective? Yeah, definitely. You know, the example I often use is, you know, a public library has a very different context to a nuclear plant. You know, I would a university is very different from a stock exchange. You know, you must start with the context, with the organization, before you even think about the firewalls, the EDRs, all of that stuff. So, you know, understand the context of the organization is very important. The internal context is about what's your objective, what you're trying to do, what's your crown jewels, you know, what are you trying to protect. You know, a library will have a much open way of thinking about it, but, you know, you probably worry about the confidential data that your member has. That's the thing you really worry about. That's your internal context. And the external context. Any thoughts on external context? What are, regulators? You know, are you regulated or not? What does your regulator want? Your customers. Do they care? Do they not care? What's the customer care about the most? You know, a lot of ISO 27001 implementer, they get certification because their customer asks them to. They have to. And you know, there's some customers has much different perspective than others. So the customers, the regulators, the market, you know, how the competitive market is positioning within, you know, your organization within that market. These are very important external and internal and external contact. And it's very, very dynamic. Things change a lot, and you know, I remember, you know, when I was still doing CISOs, and one of the organizations I worked with, insurance organization, and you know, we suddenly had this sort of this physical and digital threats coming to us, and physical protect in front of our office, and we get you know, sort of lots of probes and threat digitally, and we got a lot more virtual attacks. And then we, you know, it turns out to be we started to offer insurance to a company who tests on animals. And we started to getting threats and, you know, from the activists who protect animals. So, you know, these type of cyber threats could come in from from very different, unexpected ways of threat actors. So the issue of internal and external context is constantly evolving and need to be evaluated. A major merger and acquisition you may have, a new client you're taking on, all the environment is changing. All of this could impact your internal and external context, hence your cyber threat profile. And we need to make sure we're as a cybersecurity professional, the CISO need to be on top of these dynamic issues internally and externally to understand the context of the organization. So consider the interfaces and dependencies when determining scope. So in the standard, this clause is about the scope of the management system. So there's two different concepts of scope. One is a scope of your management system, and one is a scope of certification. So when you look at a ISO 27001 certification, that will show, the first thing will show is the scope. You could certify a very different scope. Some people will say, oh, we've got ISO 27001 certified, but when you look at the scope, maybe it's a data center or it's a small subset of the services. I think you definitely need to look at the scope. In this standard, it does also talk about the scope of your management system. The management system we talk about is this interactive processes, the component. So it's important to really understand what the scope is and what are the dependencies of this scope. I think that the dependency point becoming more and more important in cybersecurity management, in particular with these very complex supply chain issues. I think when I talk to other CISOs or people in the industry, the things they worry about the most, well, at least top 3, is the supply chain security risk. Hence, really important to understand the dependencies. You would probably, have heard or know about this, how third-party risk management has a control, how it works, and it's evolving very much, over the decades. But I think, my personal view is third-party risk management will still stay in the, 1990s or 20s. It's the same thing, sending each other questionnaires, asking some questions. It's not effective assurance or control environment to manage third-party risk. If you think about the example we have last year, the CrowdStrike issues, have you seen or read? CrowdStrike is probably the best endpoint detection and response services. Amazing technology, one of the most effective controls, I would say, within the endpoint, within the organization. Huge market share across the globe. Last year they deployed an update to their product that caused lots of companies, industries, everywhere, airport, from financial services, banks, to airport, national health, lots of organizations get impacted. It's not even a cyber attack. I think if it is actually a cyber attack, so that issue was they deployed an update that crashed the system. They actually produced a fix very quickly, and the time just taken for the entire ecosystem to recover is, it's quite significant and has lots of impact. But if it's a cyber attack, you can just consider that it will take much longer for them to even identify the problem and to have a fix and to deploy the fix and to recover from it. I think that that particular event is a wake-up call to all the cybersecurity professionals and technologists and risk managers as well to say, okay, just how deeply interconnected we are and how much a third-party software component or our supply chain may impact the security of our environment. So I think understand the interfaces and dependencies is hugely important when you want to manage the security of the organization. And I think that needs to be done in a much more thoughtful way than simply having a register. I think really need to look at how those different external components are impacting your services. What would you do to manage it?
So what would you suggest that we should be doing as an industry differently? Say we're not going to be circulating different registries of information.
Questionnaires, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if I can solve that, I would be. There's so many different attempts in the industry trying to solve these problems. So it's really, really hard. So I was trying. As the World Economic Forum and CISO group, we wanted to say, well, can we do something bold, really solve this? So finally, can we? And I think at the end, it requires a uplifting of cyber capability across the ecosystem everybody, and we need to make the economy of cybersecurity work. The reason I'm saying that is so there's work you could do as an organization. You say, okay, I'm going to be amazingly at identifying my dependencies. I've got my inventory. I've got my, it's always up to date. It's dynamic. I do due diligence on my third parties. I ask them, questionnaire questions. I get evidence as well. Not only do I ask them questions, I get evidence. I test them. That you could do that. You could have real-time monitoring. You say, not only will I get assurance, but I actually monitoring them at our environment. So whether it's CrowdStrike or other third parties, but whatever they do, they at my environment. I can see it. I can detect it. I can respond to it. I can recover from it. That's already the gold standard, I think, for organizations. But that's not good enough. Imagine the scenario of Microsoft, let's say. Okay, they will succeed in every single questionnaire you do on them. An audit, they will have evidence. You could have all the monitoring you have on your environment. That's there. But let's say, there is a compromise on the cloud at the container level. There is absolutely nothing you can do about it. So I think this level of dependency or the exposure around third party will always exist. But I'm using an extreme example to say that really capable third parties. But the problem is more at the little third party softwares you would have. I don't know if some of you have been in the industry for a while. If you actually mapped your environment, how many third party components you have? Huge tons, from the ones you can replace and the ones you will never be able to change. When we do our third party certificate question, we have huge dependency on the regulators. Right? If they're compromised, we've got lots of stuff on connection with them. You know, it's a very difficult thing to manage. I think as an industry, we all need to uplift our standard, do the things I said we need to do. You have to assume compromise, basically. You have to assume that one day these components will fail. There need to be the right controls from detection, response, and recovery. So this is the conversation I now we're having. That's why the industry talking a lot more about resilience rather than security, because it's almost impossible to be secure and to prevent. You have to think about, okay, you have to assume some of these components will fail. Once it fails, how quickly you can detect it, how quickly you can respond it, how quickly you can recover from it, becoming the key. And like the Marks and Spencers, the Jaguar Land Rovers, all these examples of compromise, that tells us that you've got to have the right recovery, response and recovery controls as well. Yeah, but I certainly think we can do better than sending each other questionnaires, which is still the majority of the practice in the industry. So the last point about continuous improvement. So 4.4 does talk about continuous improvement, and this is if you go back to the very first version of 27001, it actually had this PDCA, I think, plan, do, check, and act. So it's this continuous improvement cycle that's been taken out, but it's still in the text of 27001. So the concept of management system is you keep on learning and you continuously improve. You get better and better. So the second chapter, second clause, well, the fifth, the next part of ISO 27001 is about leadership. So it's got three things: leadership and commitment, policy, organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities. I think that you should really. I'm more from the perspective of a large organization. To have the board level engagement is the key to the success of cybersecurity. I think like over the years, I started doing cyber since 2022, 3, 4, 5. The awareness at the board level has improved like significantly. I think you've got this very low maturity board that will be like, I say they're in denial. It will never happen to us. We're fine. No one will hack us. No one cares about the library we're running. I think this in denial phase is I see that's largely gone. Maybe I'm not seeing the full picture, but I think most of the senior management of the board are no longer in the in denial phase. And I think the next phase of the board or senior executive is panic phase. So it's saying, oh my God, it's going to hit us. I'm so worried. What are you doing? And I still remember when I was becoming my first CISO job and my first meeting with the board. And the body language from the board was like, who are you? Have you got all the answers? Are we going to be hacked tomorrow? What kind of help? It's really panic, worried. This phase of the board, they need confidence. They need the people, the management or the CISO or the CIO or CRO to tell them, we've got it. We've got this under control. This is how we're doing. I think you know, the higher maturity, which I feel that the CISO often need to drive within the organization is you probably have to go through all the stages, but then you gain the trust. But the most mature level of engagement the CISO would have with the board is this assured confidence, and they will providing support and be the ally of the CISO. Why I'm saying that because there's no free security, and I always use these the triangles of security. You've got security, there's a convenience, and there's the cost. So there's a trade-off between the three things. There's no way you can have security without spending any money and not compromising on any convenience at all. Like, I want everything to be easy, efficient, and I don't want to spend any money. I want to be super secure. That's impossible. There's need to be this compromise, and security certainly is not cheap. So to do something that's not cheap and to be inconvenient to the organization, maybe slow things down as well. In order to do that, you definitely need the full commitment of the board. So I think having the board level engagement is the key for the success of the information security management. For smaller organizations, it's the same, the equivalent of the board, right? Whoever are your top management, who are the people making the call for allocating resource. It's a key, right? It's about allocating resource to do the things that's required. The second 5.2 is about policies. Again, the standards talk about policy at a very high level. It's about the intent of the organization. But different organizations have different ways of doing their policies, and they call it policies, standard, requirements, or whatever, directives. It's important to have information security policy at different levels. So, there's need to be something that expresses the intent of the organization, often linked to the risk appetite. You cannot say, I want to be 100% secure. It doesn't exist. And you need to link to the risk appetite that's relevant to the context of the organization. So the nuclear plant, I hope the security policy will talk about, national security, nation-state actor threat, top priority it's about the cybersecurity, and whilst the library can focus on the protection of personal data. So, the information security policy need to have that different level of intent. You should have the one express your intent, then you should have different policies around personal use of device, end-user computing, or malware protection, more technical requirements as well. The last one around organization. So I've seen far too many ISMS, which is Information Security Management System, operating in silos. So when I say that is this CISO have this perfect echo chamber of things that's happening. I've got do my own risk assessment. I've got my management review within the management cycle. Everything's separate from the organization's normal governance. So usually in a large corporate, maybe some of you already will see they will have its own governance. There's a risk committee, there's a board, there's ExCo, there's I think for the security management to be successful, to be taken seriously, not to be a tick box or something at a side like a pet project of the CISO, it has to be embedded within the existing governance structure. So whether it's your risk committee, your board meeting, or your exco, whatever it is within that organization, it's in particular important around the risk management side. I think there's a huge, the CISOs or cyber people are risk managers, really. You go to really very, very aligned with the risk framework of the organization. So the next clause is around the planning. So planning talks about two things. One is the actions to address the risk opportunities, and the information security objectives and the planning to achieve them. So I mentioned this opportunity point at when we talk about the definition of risk around uncertainty. I think to be a successful CISO or a cyber person, you have to have the concept and understand that there's no absolute security. It's about risk management. You need to help the business to succeed. You need to present opportunities as well. I know it feels a bit cliche and easy to say than done, but it's really, really important. Seeing CISOs to be like a police of the organization. Everything is no, you can't do this, you can't do that. If it works, that's fine, but it actually doesn't. The outcome of doing those things is people will just find other ways of doing the things they want to do and make the organization life secure. So I think when we manage security, we really need to think about both the risks and the opportunities. A firewall is most secure when you just deny all. Why don't we just deny all? There's nothing can go through. Why don't we just close the business? Then that's the most secure. I think that as a security profession, whether you do the technical work or more at a management level, you go to be able to manage the trade-offs between the opportunity cost to the risk when you make those risk trade-offs and the security decisions. So the 6.2 has a lot of sort of debate. I remember when the standard being revised, people talk about, okay, what is the information security objective or the organization's objective? How do we set them? I think it's, when a CISO or the cyber function citing their objective, we really need to look at the specific goals and targets and having them measurable as well. And ideally, there need to be some sort of short-term objectives as well as the longer-term planning. I think the point about risk-based is, what I was saying earlier is about, you need to be able to do risk-based, take a risk-based decision around security controls, rather than just, want to apply the most stringent security controls. So clause 7 is about support. They talk about resource, competence, awareness, communication, and the documented information. So I often hear to talk a little bit about a typical organization of information security team, because I know some of the students here, maybe they just come from university, and you probably just will go into the industry after doing this course. something I didn't know when I was doing the course, and I felt it could be useful for you guys. There's really quite a wide spectrum of jobs within cybersecurity. It doesn't. Some people will feel like, oh, it's all about the very technical stuff. How I remember I hired somebody who have a psychology degree into my team, and she was amazing doing training and awareness and helping the team thinking about human behavior, and she would coordinate and cooperate or collaborate with our red teaming team to think about threat actor behavior. So there's all sorts of different ways you can get into a security team. So typically there's a few things. So there's always a SOC, a Security Operations Center. In a smaller organization, that may not be a SOC, but it will be the people providing those activities. So these are the eyes of you have within organization. A Security Operations Center would operate the tools that monitor your entire organization. So they would often deploy tooling at your organization endpoint network, and they could see what's happening, and they could detect intrusion, respond to intrusion. So SOC is, definitely key. It's like your security system, your alarm, as well as the police. So the whole thing within the SOC organization. Often you would have a security architecture sort of team. So these are the team or the people who look at the security of the architecture security of your environment. So, for example, how the network is structured, that they have layers of defense, how your endpoint is segregated from your production environment, how you're thinking about microsegregation. That the security architect is important because it's like you need a really good architecture for your house. Having a good security architecture will allow you to operate in a more secure manner. There's also a security engineering team, less so in a smaller organization, but these are the people who engineer the security tooling. So you've got lots of security tooling involved to protect the organization, your DDoS mitigation, your EDR, your malware. There's a whole list of DLP, data leakage prevention, all the tooling. Often the security engineering team would be the ones that help to deploy and set up and managing those solutions. These days, you often have a GRC team, so the governance, risk, and compliance team. They often look at the controls. So if you think about, in order to manage security, you need the cyber controls, so the protective controls, the detective controls. There's a lot of technical controls, technology controls, like you got to patch your environment. When you configure your firewall, you need to make sure it's securely configured. You disabled unnecessary protocols, all that stuff. It's not directly under the control of the security team, but it's really important as a control to protect the organization. And often the GRC team will have a view of the full control set that's required within the organization, and they're able to do this ongoing monitoring, testing, following through. As a security function, there's a lot of chasing involved. You need to work with your technology team to patch the environment, firewall team to review the firewall rules, and the business team to have the right, design and deployment of the product to the website as well, etc. Some organizations would have a penetration test team. So whether they do it themselves or they work with external specialists, the pen testers. So these are often certified companies to do penetration testing, i.e. they try to attack your environment, your systems, or you can call ethical hacking or pen test or red teaming. It's basically the activity is to test your environment before the bad case does it, and then you fix the issue. So penetration testing is also very, it's very important. Some organizations will have a threat intel team. That's very, for large organizations, maybe smaller, they wouldn't have it, and maybe part of the SOC. So essentially, the threat intel is about understand the internal and external context. Okay, who are likely to be attacking the organization? What are the profile of the threat actors? What are the TTPs and the techniques they would employ to attack the organization? What are the latest vulnerabilities? What are the latest attacking techniques? And they may also, scanning the dark web to see if there's sort of mentioning of the organization or there's data leak. They look at social media, etc. So it's about looking at the threat landscape. That's also, often the team who have that coordination with law enforcement, with other industry bodies to share the threat intel information as well. And some organizations have training departments, and all the organization I work for, the security team I have managed, I would always have somebody to look at the human side of security. So, the old saying people used to say, security, human are the weakest link of security. I don't agree with that. I do think it is important to look at behavior of human behavior and educate and raise the awareness of the employees. But I think you can't rely on that as a control, because like all organizations do phishing exercise, for example. So they send out phishing emails to exercise the organization to say, oh, you can't, and to measure the click rate. Like if an organization with really good awareness, the click rate will be very low. And maybe 20% is for low awareness organization to 5% is a highly good awareness organization. But unfortunately, the bad news is you only need one person to click on it. And for a capable, sophisticated attacker to get one person to click on the link, it's always achievable, 100% in any organization. That's just human. That's you cannot manage that. Kevin Mitnick, the guy from the US who was the hacker. Yeah. So he after he's got caught and now he runs a security company, basically doing social engineering tests. So I met him at an event. He said, "Oh, I've been doing this for decades, and I have thousands of engagements I've been doing. I've never ever failed, ever." that's not saying we shouldn't be doing it, because you're reducing the likelihood, you can make it harder. Make it harder for attackers is also a good outcome, but you cannot rely on, what I'm saying is, you cannot rely on human not clicking on a link, so there has to be other controls to manage the security of it. So I think that, to talk about the how information security team look like is really to give you some idea on the direction you want to go. Once you finish here, you get into the industry. What do you want to do? But I certainly think there's still a talent gap in cybersecurity. It's one of the top things people talk about in the CISO team. And I think it's probably will get even more challenge when maybe AI being used to do more basic stuff, and it's harder for people to gain experience, so that becoming more senior to do the people you need to do the activities you need to do on top of AI as well. So, but anyway, I certainly think it's an amazing industry to be in, and to be in security. There's not a day is the same. It's really interesting, and regardless which direction you might want to go in the cyber, in your cyber career, maybe you want to do standardization as well. So I think the last point, this is 7.4 about communication. So 27001 actually have a requirement about communication, which is amazing. When I was a CISO, I really always thought, okay, my job is to create the environment for my team to perform, to hire the best talent to lead those teams, to sell security. So really, to manage my board and my senior management, so that they can trust me, and I can give them confidence, and I can get the buy-in from the stakeholders. So I spend lots of time when you become a CISO is to tell the story and to sell it. So to have a good communication is really important. From the top to that, if you're a CISO, you communicate with senior stakeholders. But even if you are a pen tester, you go to communicate with the technical teams. You need to have the buy-in from the technical team to patch. You need to help them to understand what do they need to do to configure the firewalls, all of this. So I think regardless what you do in cybersecurity, to communicate why it's required, what's required, having a good communication, and be able to tell the story about risk, then to lead to the actual security activity is really, really important. So Clause 8 is about operational planning and controls information security risk management. So in this chapter, I think this is where 27002 is referred to. So it actually says you need to do a risk assessment first to determine the controls required to mitigate the risk, and compare the controls you have determined with Annex A of the standard, which is the list of controls from 27002. This is a very fundamental concept of 27002 that has been misunderstood by lots of people, including the auditors. So 27001 has not mandated every organization to implement the 93 controls in 27002. It has not said you have to go through that control list to say why you don't need it. But what it does say is important is you need to understand, like what we said in the beginning, you need to understand the context of your organization, internal, external, your threat, what you're trying to protect. You need to do your risk assessment, understand what is the risk. Are you the nuclear plant or are you the library? What are the assets you're exposing that need to be protected? What are the risks associated to those assets, to your environment? And determine the controls required to mitigate that risk. You may not need a firewall. You may not need a anti-malware. You may not need a DLP, depending on what your risk is. So that's what 27001 said. But a lot of people think, oh my God, I need to go through all the 93 controls. I need to have them all. If I don't have it, I have to justify why I don't have it. That's not what the standard said. The standard said you go to do your risk assessment, understand your risk, determine what's required to mitigate the risk. So there are the different ways to perform risk assessment. The earlier version of 27001 has actually mandated a risk assessment method. Some of you may remember or know this threat and vulnerability model. So you need to have all your assets. You need to identify the threat against the asset and the vulnerability against the asset. You do a risk assessment to determine control. That's been taken out long time ago because there's very many different ways you can do a risk assessment. There's an event-based risk assessment. There's a risk assessment around scenario. There's various different ways you can do risk assessment. And my personal sort of preference is always you go to use the method that in your organization you do all the other risk assessment. So most large organizations would have a risk management framework, enterprise risk management framework, and there will be a method there. I think whatever you do in cyber got to be aligned with that methodology so that you don't do something that's completely alien to the rest of the organization. So it's important to choose the right method to do the risk assessment, but the standard did not mandate what you do. There's also different ways to treat risk. So, it's perfectly acceptable to accept the risk. We do this all the time, and without this, there will be no business to run. You might as well close the door for everything because we always operate within a level of risk within an organization. As a CISO, I have supported the organization to run in certain cases, without certain firewall configuration, obsolete software, critical vulnerabilities not being remediated. Those things are all acceptable under the circumstances, depending on the context, the trade-off, the likelihood of the event, compensating controls, opportunity cost. So often the CISO feels like, I need to protect the organization. That's not the job of the CISO. The CISO is to assess the risk, present options, and having the management to make an informed decision. And sometimes the right decision is to say, we accept the risk. So you can accept the risk, you could mitigate the risk, and that often involves reduce the likelihood or reduce the impact reducing the likelihood, often some preventative controls are reducing the likelihood of event. Like a DDoS protection solution will reduce the likelihood of DDoS risk. Often a recovery control are mitigating the impact of a risk. If you're able to detect something quickly and recover very quickly. So you can accept the risk, you can mitigate the risk, you can transfer the risk. Insurance is a good risk transfer mechanism. Although you're only transferring the financial impact of the events, not the reputational impact and other impact, legal compliance, that's not, but as long as you make that clear when you do the risk treatment, it's perfectly acceptable. I think the cyber insurance in itself could be a very interesting topic for a whole lecture, to be honest. The insurance industry has evolved quite a lot, in particular around the cyber coverage. I think it's, the CISO definitely need to be well versed around the insurance coverage within the organization on cyber in particular. So I have this point around this project vendor, the risk assessment. So I think there's often I see this limitation on understanding of risk assessment. When I was a CISO, a lot of what my team was doing is managing changes, because risk got introduced so you would have a baseline of your environment, hopefully, as you're managing the security of the organization, you've done your risk assessment, you've deployed the controls, and you've got the right team to do the right things. The majority of the activity you have is managing what's changing either within or outside of your environment. So this is the internal and external contact. And so you need to have this organization. So, in my team, I would often have this within the security architecture and security engineering team to do this risk assessment on an ongoing basis on what's changing. So often within an organization, they will have new project. A new project will make change to your environment by definition. They may deploy a new software, new services, new product. You need to have a security risk assessment. Does that expose more risk? Do I have the right architecture? Are they protected? Do a pen test on the product? New vendor introducing new risk. You need to do a risk assessment around, as I said earlier, is the vendor have a good security controls? Do I have detection if they go wrong? Can I manage the recovery, etc. Merger and acquisition, huge risk, suddenly the business doing something very different. New people, new organizational structure, new network, new product. The cyber team need to be there. Application changes, system changes, firewall change, the day-to-day BAU changes within the engineering organization, production. All of these things could introduce security risk. So the risk assessment have to be ongoing, whether it's done by the security team or it's embedded by the engineering team, business team, product team, and those are absolutely critical to maintain the security of the organization and need to be part of the security program. So the last point I want to mention it's linked to what I said earlier around this determination of the control and this concept called statement of applicability. So in any ISO 27001 certificate, you've got usually the organization, the scope, the auditors, and then it's this document, which is really important. It's a statement of applicability, which shows the controls the organization has determined as the necessary set of controls mitigating the security risk compared with Annex A controls. If you are an auditor, or if you are a regulator, or if you are an organization, you want to see the security of your third party, and they give you their ISO certified, this is the document you want to see because it actually tells you the control they have deployed within their environment. And this is the list of controls often the auditor will audit when they go to do their stage 2 audit as well. So make sure you actually look at this rather than just say, yeah, do you have ISO 27001 certificate? Because that could mean many different things. So 9, we're I think close to the end, to the standard. So now you've done your implementation, and how do you perform the evaluation of your ISMS? So this chapter is all about the monitoring, the audit, and the management review. So this is the, in the PDCA circle, this is the check part. Checking how effective your ISMS is. So I think the first thing I want to mention is around the KPIs and KRIs. You can't manage things you cannot measure. I think that, being said, and it's really, really important to define those KPI and KRIs, right? And the linking thing to that is, I always try to find the KPI or the KRI can tell me if I know that something has not worked. So this is really important. So when you look at all I look at the security incident I have seen, and if you read about all the big security breaches, rarely, because they do not have the control at all, and often they do, but the control failed. Your EDR is not effective on certain endpoint, and then that endpoint got compromised. Or your DDoS had a configuration change, certainly it's not working. So there's often you would have the control, but somehow the control has failed. So it's really important in your measurement or your way you monitor your environment, there are the specific control and measures to tell you something is not working, the coverage, the effectiveness, or something. I think so that you be able to ask yourself that question, regardless what you do, which level you are, that's an important question to ask. An assurance program can help monitor that, and this internal audit point often, again, a siloed CISO probably say, I'm going to implement my own assurance program, but again, my approach is always, okay, use your organization's monitoring and control environment. Often, if you're financial services, you would have this 3 lines of defense already within the organization. And the first line, the second line, risk, the third line, internal audit. And you often have external audit as well, and you have this 3 lines of defense. So leverage that. rather than create something that's completely separate.
Is there any specific method to perform this evaluation, like waterfall or Scrum methodology? Is there any methodology to do this performance evaluation?
I mean, not by the standards. So the 27001 is a very principle-based standard. It's only the requirement is all about the what. It doesn't say any. There's no how requirement at all. So it's all the what is required rather than how to do it. Yeah. So you just need to do what's the most effective way within the organization that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, you can use your GRC organization. You can use your internal audit. You can use what I often see in larger organization is I would have a 3-line of defense assurance map. I know it sounds really bureaucratic, but essentially it's to say, okay, all the assurance activities within the organization, let's put them in a page or a document so that you understand the clarity around the coverage. So you take, essentially it's about getting comfort, right? Assurance is about how do you get the comfort. You could rely on somebody tell you that's the least comfort I will get. You can look at the metrics. You could, have different people testing the controls, evidence. Like, for me, the things that always help me, like I trust the most, is a sort of proper pen test. And in the financial services sector or the CNI, Critical National Infrastructure in the UK, there's something called the CBEST test. It's a threat intelligence-led penetration testing. It's very, very thorough. Sometimes takes 3 to 6 months to execute. You would do a certified third party. They would start with a threat intel. They could look at your profile. They will do social engineering, reconnaissance. Then they can use anything they want to try to penetrate into your environment. This is one of the innovation of the UK actually, and now similar approach like in the EU called Tiber, and US starts to do that as well in many other jurisdictions. So that just gave me the most comfort when I get the professional to test the hell out of the environment. But this is about getting comfort, right? The assurance. So when I talk to my board, I will say, here's a statement about how secure and how much protection I have, and I would always follow on the level of confidence I have around that, because I've got high degree of confidence because I've done I've got the test and the assurance I need to get that. But you have to do a risk-based approach. You can't spend all your money doing assurance, but understand what's the most important thing to focus, and using what level of assurance is a decision that you need to make. Yeah. Seeking management. So the 9.3 is management review, seeking feedbacks. Again, I would do that in a constant dynamic basis rather than wait, do every quarter ask for feedbacks.
So defining the effective key performance indicators, key risk indicators, that's within the scope of the job of a CISO, or would that be more like some chief risk officer type role?
Yeah, very good question. I think that certainly they all have different roles in defining. So now, I work in risk. I would certainly want my CISO to define it, and I would apply on it. and send it off.
Working together, I guess.
Working together, yeah. But I mean, I always think you want the CISO to take the ownership. You know, that's really important. I think this is the last clause, and the PDCA thing is about the, you know, once you've checked, you've done your regular performance, and you need to act on anything you need to improve. So incident management process is really important. You know, like if you know, the best lessons learned is from others' failure. But if you don't even learn from your own failure, that's just no excuse. So incident management process is absolutely key. Making sure that get into the actual root causes and fix that. And this thing about exercise, it's really, I think it's, when I started doing cybersecurity, it's very much about prevention and protection. I think there's huge shift in the last few years from this very preventative protection, prevention-focused security concept into a, you know, well, of course you still need to do that, but looking at detection, response, and recover. So the exercise, a lot of it is around exercising the detection, response, and recover. The reason being, I think there's much more acknowledgement and understanding of, you know, it's not about whether, you know, there will be a breach or not. It's when you will have a breach and how bad the breach is. You know, every organization will have security incidents. Every single one. There's little ones, big ones. I think the successful companies are the ones that, you know, you have little incidences, and even you have bigger one, you can get to it very quickly and recover from it very quickly. So this concept around, you know, exercise, and this concept around cyber resilience, the concept around recovery, you know, response and recovery becoming much more important in this, you know, in the cybersecurity context, in the controls of spectrum. We're seeing more and more focus on this, you know, this side of the controls. And I think this exercise, again, you got to do it through the organization, linked to the business continuity and crisis management topic you probably will learn or, you know, will cover. You know, it's not just about the technical capability, but it's also around the organizational responses, you know, the crisis communication, and the substitution, the business continuity. If the whole thing is done for 2 weeks, what would you do? Do pen and paper, clipboard, or whatever it is? You know, if a third party is compromised, do you have alternative? How quickly you will bring it online? You know, if you get a ransom attack, your backup is compromised. Do you have offline backup, immutable backup? Are you able to reboot? Do you have the, you know, bare metal reboot playbook? Do you know where to get all those servers? You know, there's sort of all of these things requires planning and exercise. So the last part of 27001 is Annex A. I talked about, it's called normative standard because it's integral part of the standard, and it's just the control objective listed from 27002. And I already talked about how to use this, link to the risk assessment and the statement of applicability. But as I said, it's not the mandatory requirement to implement all the control. That's it. Any questions? Any other